Beach Coverup by Yabbey. You will need printed PDF patterns, scissors and tape for assembly, fabric, rotary cutter or fabric scissors, and iron. For this project you can serge your edges or use French seams. I'll be doing the French seam method. Let's get started. Here we have our back pieces pinned together wrong side to wrong side. When we make a French seam, you want to make sure that you start with your fabric wrong side to wrong side. Almost all other sewing things is right side to right side, but we end up making the seam fold back in on itself. So pin your back and remember to stop your seam at the notch, because this up here will start to go over the shoulder. So from here down, we're going to just do a regular straight seam. Once you have your regular seam in here, so we're going to be stopped. This is the back and this is the back neckline, so I put a little notch right here. So we're going to trim the seam allowance down over here. I'm going to trim off about a 1/4 inch. We basically just want to make the seam allowance small. I'm using a rotary cutter, but use whatever tool. What you can measure, and you can draw a straight line and cut with regular scissors too. This is just a little bit faster. So once you trim down that seam, I've now pressed my seam allowance down like this, and then we are going to flip this down. And now over here, this is right sides together with the raw edge on the inside. So I'm going to press the seam here, and then I've pressed this flat along there. So when we go to the machine, in here, you want to catch that seam as you sew along here, just making sure that all the raw edges stay on the inside. So here we've got our seam allowance. You can kind of feel it, like where it stops, so you want to make sure you're sewing just on the outside edge of that, because you don't want your seam allowance to show past your seam. So now your back piece should look like this from the front. Next, we will pin on the front pieces. So I've gone ahead and pinned both of them on now. So you can see here's the center back seam, there's the neck opening. So we're pinning this along here, wrong sides to wrong sides. And we're going to do the same thing again to make a French seam. We're just going to stitch along here, trim the seam allowance, and press it and flip it back over to make a French seam. Now I've gone and stitched it here. So I'm going to trim my seam allowances again. So this is the same technique. We're using the French seam technique on all the seams here. So we're doing the top shoulders now, shoulder seam now. We'll do that on the side seam in a minute. So now that I have trimmed my seam allowance, here it is here. I'm back at the ironing board. So we're going to press and fold this underneath and press along this edge again. And once we've pressed along this edge, again, we're going to sew it so we catch the seam allowance on the inside, like this, along your machine. So once we've seamed it along here at the machine, it should look like this at the top. This is our shoulder seam. So again, trim off just any little flyaway pieces like that. It's no big deal. You can fix that up. And just give it a press. So once your shoulder seam is finished, I've now pinned it up along the side seam here. So again, we're doing the same French seam, pin it wrong sides together, and we're just going to sew all the way along here again as before, trim your seam allowance, and sew your French seam. Okay, so I've stitched along this edge, and now I've started to trim the side seams. For curves, I like to use my scissors, although some people use a rotary cutter on curves too, but we're just doing the same thing again here. We're just trimming our seam allowance, and we'll press it and sew it to the other side again. Okay, so now that we have sewn the French seam on the side seams, your beach cover-up is almost ready. So now we just need to hem the armholes and the neck and front edge. So, and there might be a few spots where if your material is a little bit frayed, or if it's not totally even, like right here, just trim it up. It's not a big deal. So all the way around, we're going to do a double turn hem. So I usually do that at 1/4 of an inch, so you might want to do that slightly differently. I honestly don't even usually measure. If your material is really thin, like mine, sometimes I will give it a press before I sew it. As long as your pins are metal, don't iron over plastic pins. That's not a good idea. So you can just double turn it like this all the way around. And sometimes I will iron just a little bit in between my pins. Again, don't melt plastic. That's no good. So you're going to do that all the way around your front edge and on your armhole. We are going to do it on the bottom too, but you usually get a better result if you do around the edge first, and then the hem will, like at the bottom, will trap that edge in place. Okay, so get pinning up your hems around your neck hole and your armholes, and then you just top stitch here, just a regular stitch. So here I have the hem now at the very bottom. So I've done the side seam here and top stitched that. So we're doing the same thing. I just folded it again, and I pinned it, and I have been pressing everything as I go along in between like that before I sew it. Where this is very fine fabric, I just find that makes it a little easier. So do that all the way around, and that's your last step. All right, so there you have it. You're all done your beach cover-up next time you're at the beach. So I hope you enjoyed that video today, and we'll see you again in another tutorial. Again, my name is Elise, and I am your instructor for this Yabbey project. So we'll see you another time in another video. You've completed the beach cover-up. Show us your completed make by tagging us on Instagram at Yabby's or TikTok at Yabbey. Don't forget to like and subscribe.